Welcome to episode 248, From Forced Repression to Safe Expression, Making Room for Anger, featuring Bronwyn Schweigerdt, licensed marriage and family therapist. Make sure to subscribe to be alerted about future episodes by Clearly Clinical. Learn, grow, shine. Hello to our listeners. My name is Beth Irias, and I am really looking forward to the conversation that I'm going to have today with Bronwyn Schweigerdt. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and her jam is all things anger. And I think for many of us, it is all things not anger, and not necessarily as clinicians, but as humans, because anger is such a complicated emotion, and many of us have been conditioned to not feel it or not acknowledge it at all. Or if we are acknowledging it, like the only real socially acceptable ways to express it and experience it. So I'm grateful for Bronwyn for joining us today and having this conversation about how we can reorient our relationship with anger and also bring that into the therapy room. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bronwyn.
Absolutely. Yes, reorient is a great word. I like to say heal our relationship with anger, because we all have a relationship with anger, but not necessarily a healthy one. And that starts with just kind of how we view it, like you were alluding to. I like to see anger as like a light on the dashboard of our car saying, hey, there's something off. Let's check under the hood. And the goal here would be to bring whatever's going on to resolution. So if we can start seeing it as like a warning or a barometer that something needs resolution, so we're not afraid of the anger, we're not judging the anger. Many of us were raised to see anger as bad, maybe especially those of us who are female. Anger's bad. That anger makes us bad. It's shameful. Or it can trigger abandonment, because maybe when we were little and we expressed anger in any way, Mom gave us the silent treatment. And so our little brains formed this template where us having boundaries or saying no or having any anger means we're all alone. And so that template's still very much alive and well. And so we go through life still playing that template out. And so we're afraid of our anger, or maybe we only associate anger with, a parent or someone in our life who was out of control angry, and we don't know how to do anger well. So, it starts with seeing why it's there. It's there to inform us, to give us wisdom. I like the word emotion because most of that word is actually motion. And I see anger as an emotion, like all other emotions, that are there to move us in a productive, healthy way.
Fantastic. I'm so excited. There's so much here. For our listeners that are not familiar with you and your work, why don't you take a minute and tell us how you really honed in on this topic of anger and why it's something that's so important to you?
Yeah. So I, have a podcast called Angry at the Right Things that is largely about anger, but also a lot about shame and even hatred and all those feelings, emotions that we tend to kind of stay away from. And I honed in first on anger because I myself, before I became a therapist, desperately needed a good therapist. And I was very, very depressed, barely functional. And I went to multiple therapists at that time. This is about 16 years ago. And every time sitting in the office on that chair, on that couch, I did not feel understood. I didn't feel like the therapist knew what to do with my anger. Intuitively, it just felt wrong. So I resolved, you know what? I'm going to go back to grad school and become a therapist and be that therapist and figure this out, which is what I did. But between that depressive episode and then a subsequent one I had after that, I now see in retrospect, both of those horrible depressive episodes were a result of my own disassociated anger at those times. The first one was my suppressed anger at my husband because I felt like he was not empathizing with me when I needed him most. The second one was actually at the placement where I was an intern when I was starting out, and I felt absolutely betrayed by the director, who also was my supervisor. So I did not have a healthy relationship with anger those times. So that anger went underground and it became depression. And I started connecting the dots, seeing this happen in my clients where it wasn't just depression, it was anxiety. If they told me they had a panic attack, I'd say, wait, let's slow down. What happened, right before that panic attack that might have made you angry if you had been connected with your anger? And there's always a trigger. There was always something. And so I started just seeing how when humans dissociate from our anger, it doesn't just evaporate into the ether. It makes us sick with depression, with anxiety, and then also a ton of somatic illness, from migraines to insomnia to vertigo to autoimmune disorders. And, if you want, I can share some studies with you that actually substantiate all of that, especially when it comes to autoimmune disorders.
Thank you. You already mentioned, and I think, a huge part of this is how we're socialized in our relationship with anger. Prior to recording, I had talked with you in the past about, I don't know how old I was when I finally was like, oh, that's anger. Because if you had asked me up until that point, I would have been like, I don't have anger. I just get sad. And it turns out I actually did have a lot of anger. But so a lot of it was socialization. And for our listeners who are thinking about this topic, I want to point you also to our episode with Joanne Kim, where she talks about alexithymia, particularly with marginalized people. So women, people assigned female at birth, people with various or overlapping marginalized identities, and the way that anger is really just not okay to be expressed in certain circles and in our society as a whole. So I really want to tip my hat to that episode of Joanne Kim and encourage you to take a listen to that. But bringing it back to this conversation with Bronwyn, there is so much here. I would love to talk a little bit about what happens when we don't allow anger in, when we push it down, when we sublimate it elsewhere, whether, I'm sure you'll talk about it, but addiction, these other things that may make it seem like we've gotten rid of it, but it actually did not go anywhere.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up that word alexithymia. I want to just kind of build on that just so everyone knows what that means. I define alexithymia as what one of my clients said one day. She called it keeping it all inside. I think that is like the common vernacular for alexithymia. It just means technically someone who is not identifying their feelings or expressing them into words. So alexithymia is basically, when we think about anger, it's suppressed anger. It's anger that is still in our bodies, getting stagnant, making us sick. And I do want to share some studies again on the autoimmune piece. So I found the Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect in 2021 published an article, and they showed how alexithymia contributes to autoimmune disease onset. And they concluded, and I'm quoting here, these findings are in line with previous studies that show associations between childhood trauma, alexithymia, and autoimmune disorders. One of the autoimmune disorders that I found that was most shocking to me in the research that I did was actually type 1 diabetes in very young children was associated with alexithymia, meaning those children are less likely to talk about their feelings. They are more likely to have more severe type 1 diabetes or even have type 1 diabetes at all. There was also a study with women who were more alexithymia having more likelihood of having multiple sclerosis or more advanced symptoms of multiple sclerosis. So this was really shocking to me that because my first degree was in nutrition, and I come from more of a physiological background. My first master's is in nutrition as well as my undergraduate degree. And I used to ascribe to the belief, like, if we just live a healthy lifestyle, we're going to be healthy. And the fact that just holding it all inside is causing this degree of sickness in people, I would have never guessed that a few years ago. But I see it again in my clients. And I want to give some examples of how I've seen it in my clients and in my own life, if that's okay. Yeah. So just personally, about 2 years ago, I ended up finally feeling my feelings of anger towards my dad, like allowing myself to be angry with him. I think I disassociated from the anger at how he's treated me my entire life. Now I'm 54, so that's about 30 years. And guess what else happened for about 30 years? I mean, when I started, feeling this level of anger. The other thing that had happened for 30 years was I had very severe insomnia. And I am going to give him an ultimatum where he either needs to become a safe person and apologize and own this and change, or we don't have any relationship. And I did give him that ultimatum, and he took the latter choice. So we have no relationship. It's been 2 years. And guess what? The minute all that went down, I was able to discontinue all my medications for sleep. And I started sleeping like a baby. I've never slept so well in my adult life. So that is one example. I absolutely know that is me no longer betraying myself. I see a lot of times insomnia as like our inner child saying, hey, wake up, see that you are betraying me, do right by me. And I was not doing right by me. I was betraying myself. And so now I believe I've integrated in a way. I'm doing right by myself, by little Bronwyn, finally. And I'm feeling the result of that. So another example, I have a client. She came to me over 2 years ago now and had psychosis, actually, years of hallucinations. And she had been hospitalized many times. And, her hallucinations, and she's given me permission to share all this, her hallucinations were of very scary things like witches and Dementor type figures that would kind of haunt her. She was on a lot of medications for all that. And I, after I got to know her, after a few sessions, I'm like, those seem like projections of your mother, actually, don't you think? And within a few months, she cut off her relationship with her mother, and the hallucinations completely stopped. And it's now been 2 years. She is now on no medications, and she is doing fantastic. So those are extreme examples. I had another client who had about a month-long headache, and she had scheduled an appointment with a doctor. We met on a Tuesday. By the end of the session, she was able to really feel the anger that was underneath the headache and put it into words and express it out of her body in fantasy and make resolutions to have boundaries. And her headache was completely gone. She texted me 4 days later and said, you know what? Today was the appointment I was supposed to go see a doctor for, but I have not had a headache since we met, 4 days ago. So I'm just letting you know, thank you.
Thank you for those examples. I know in past podcasts we've had some discussion of those kinds of things, of why do we see increase in autoimmune disorders, specific conditions within particular subsets of society, and a lot of it speaking more and more to trauma. And that when we're looking at trauma, a fundamental component of that is loss of control. And then when you look at what anger is about, like anger would be a really natural and rational way for us to get control back. But if it's not going to work, we believe it's going to make our circumstances worse, or even if it's not conscious, then we push it down. And, you could start to see how it's all related in that particular somatic element. And of course, not saying that every case of insomnia is related to unexpressed anger, but just the reality that our anger, our hostility, our rage, I think are there for a reason. I think just that is one of the things that I see come up in therapy is it's like, well, it's inconvenient. I don't want to feel it. It's uncomfortable. I'm pacing and I can't sleep well. And this idea of like, I just want to get rid of it because it's uncomfortable. Can you speak to like, number one, what is anger? How do you see it and define it? And like, what purpose does it serve from a evolutionary perspective? Like we evolved to have this feeling, but yet have lots of big feelings, the meta feelings about the anger.
Yeah, that's a great question. So going back to it's emotions are there to elicit motion, movement. It's there to give us wisdom. And we start with just going, you know what, Bronwyn, it's okay that you're feeling anger right now. It's okay to feel. So that's step one, is just knowing it's valid. It is there for my good ultimately, and for everyone's good ultimately. And I can just say, I feel it right here in my chest, and that's an okay thing to feel. And then second, what does it need? What does this part of my chest want to say or do right now? Oh, it wants to be more assertive. It wants to say, hey, Beth, we were scheduled to meet at 9:15 and it's 9:30 and this has happened before. Like, what's up? And that's literally me channeling that anger out of my body. So it's no longer stagnating inside of me, making me sick. But you're not feeling any which way. You're not like, oh my God, she's so rude. I'm just like, hey, what's up? This has happened before. So it is a type of accountability, but I don't have to be a jerk either. I can just say, what's up? I've noticed that there's a pattern where this has happened. Is everything okay? So that's accountability. So I can channel it out of my body with assertiveness, bringing some type of accountability or a boundary. So let's say you respond and you're like, what are you talking about? It's never happened. Well, now I'm like, okay, so I guess Beth is not a safe person and I'm going to need a boundary. Do I need to be a jerk and say, you're out of my life? No, I could just say, you know what? I don't think this is a good fit, us working together, because I'm not hearing any accountability on your end, right? So those are examples of anger is there to help us to be true to ourselves, not enabling people, and doing right by ourselves in the moment. So that's really how I view it. And I, as a therapist, would want to encourage other therapists. I think our job is to evoke that anger more, help people move more towards their anger instead of shying away. I think our natural disposition is to be like, I don't know, this is what happened. And, you know, as a therapist, I say, you know, that's messed up. That's not okay. You do know that's not normal, right? Like I'll say things like that. And my job is to move them towards the anger. So they're like, oh, really? Is that right? And that's good for them to know their anger is valid. And the next step, we can externalize it out of our body with boundaries, with assertiveness and accountability. And then I also have a few techniques I'd like to share with you that are just things that we do in therapy, if that's okay, with the anger.
I would love to. I want to ask some questions about what you just said. Speaking of anger in therapy, you know, the microcosm and the macrocosm in general, particularly for those of us who have been hurt by power systems before, the expression of anger makes us feel all kinds of ways. I remember being in a therapy session when I was what I call a wee baby therapist, and it was with a family. And in this case, it was a mom and dad and a couple of kids. And the mom had expressed previously that she felt like dad's way of expressing emotion just was like so intense, and that it was, I think she used the word scary. And it happened a few sessions later that the dad was upset and his body language changed and he has this big booming bass voice. And you know, I'm sitting there with my little heart going, because like, oh my God, like all of the intensity just got ratcheted up. I'm aware of myself sitting in that room where it's like, I'm much more petite. Like, where is the door? You know, like I'm watching all of this unfold. And that experience is certainly not unique to me. Like, I think we've all been there. If you do enough therapy, like someone's going to get really mad in your office. And sometimes it could be at you. And I remember like having to like deep breathe and like regulate what I was feeling, and then making this choice of like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to bring it into the room, so to speak, and say, wow, your body language just changed. Your voice just got really loud and I felt scared. I'm wondering, what was that like for your wife? What was that like for the kids? Can you speak up, you know, and like trying to like kind of balance the energy? And,
I love
you know,
that.
I don't, you know, that was what happened in that moment, but it was like my first real taste of it, and how easy it would have been because of my own past experiences outside of the therapy room to be like, shut up, like, don't say anything, don't poke the dragon. And there is also the reality, I don't, you know, I can't speak for anybody else. I've almost gotten hit in therapy before. I was very, very close once, more than once. And depending on certain environments, certain clientele, there's also the reality of like anger could become violent. And so we need to be aware of that piece as well. But talking about nonviolent anger, I think for many of us, it scares us and we shut down. And we do that as humans and we do that clinically. And it's a big ask to be able to contain somebody else's anger and not shut down from it.
Yes, and I'm so glad you brought that up, Beth, because I think we can all relate to that so much, and I love that. And here's the irony, though, because it is so counterintuitive that what, people who are trained with de-escalation techniques, who like, let's say, go to the scene of a crime that's about to happen, where let's say there's a ex-husband and ex-wife, and she's going to pick up the kids, and he's getting out, a firearm because he hates her, and they have a de-escalator come to the scene. You know what that de-escalator is trained to do is actually to validate that man's anger. So let's say that's Joe. That de-escalator is going to go, Joe, I see how angry you are right now. I don't blame you because Barbara just like told you, she just said something so emasculating and she just shamed you for having been the father and the husband that you were. And I don't blame you for being that upset. And so when we move towards the anger, when we validate, when we, push past our natural inclination to be like, oh my God, that actually calms that person's anger. That is what de-escalates. So now Joe's like, oh yeah, I do feel like that. She is shaming. Yeah, you're right. And he's calmer. And then you go, yeah, Joe, I bet she said so many things like that over the years. I bet that just really made you question, your own capacity to be a father and your own masculinity. And I don't blame you for feeling like this. And then now Joe's like maybe close to tears, right? So as we can learn to move toward the anger, to validate it, to understand that under that anger is a lot of pain. And there's a really good reason they're feeling triggered in that moment. That's going to calm that person down. So what's shareable is bearable. When they feel understood by us, they're going to be much more tranquil in the room.
I appreciate that example. I remember being at a training a long time ago about adolescence and quote unquote acting out behaviors. And like destruction of property and conversations like that. I remember the facilitator talking about how when we feel like what we are saying isn't being heard, then sometimes we escalate it in order to get the message across. And if the environment is more responsive to the expression of anger, it may not get to that level of intensity. And I'll be darned if I can't relate to that.
Yeah.
Because it is like, as we're talking about it, I think these are really logical concepts, but when we're in the moment and our limbic system starts acting up, we don't necessarily know where to go with it. And as humans and as clinicians, I can see the trap that exists there, going back to what you said earlier, of like, it doesn't go away. It sublimates someplace else. And then that's where more problems may develop. You had just mentioned anger de-escalation strategies. Can you speak more about that? Because it's, again, I'm imagining, and I've been in those situations, I'm imagining myself a petite woman in an environment. I've absolutely been in situations clinically where I have a significantly large person screaming in my face. Tell us, like, what are the best strategies when we have a client getting really mad at us about something?
Yeah, well, so that would depend here, kind of what I'm hearing you say. So if someone is triggered, their anger is valid, but their reaction is disproportionate in the present, right? So if you're saying something that's touching and provoking something or evoking something within them, because it's getting too close to home, there is genuine hurt there and there's genuine anger, and that is very valid. But they also, it's not okay for them to act disproportionately towards you in the moment. So I would kind of want to see that, like clarify that. But if I have a client who is, telling me, I hate him so much, and I'll just match her and go, yeah, tell me where you feel that hatred in your body. And then she'll tell me, I'll say, what does your gut want to do in fantasy or say in fantasy? And we go to town in fantasy. I am all about, helping clients to work out those things in fantasy because, let's say she's like, I want him to fall into a sewage pit and drown. I'm like, I bet you do. I don't blame you. So I'm all about that. But if someone's, being very rude or screaming at me in a therapy session, I'll say, you know what? I understand this is really evocative for you and you are triggered and that's valid. But you know what? This is not okay the way you're treating me right now. This is your anger at your mom and it seems to be coming out at me and it's really displaced and I'm going to shut this down. So it really depends on what we're doing in the session.
Thank you. And to lend context, anybody that just heard me say that, I previously worked with families where children and adolescents had sometimes been removed from the home, and a lot of intense emotion in family systems, or me being the one to say, we're not going to have that family therapy session today. And here's why. And then sometimes that didn't go well, or we're not going to have a family visit today, or whatever it is. So they were clinical, but not necessarily in the context of therapy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But also like working in environments, everything that I'm thinking about, I was working in residential care, working in much higher acuity and reasonably a much higher level of intensity around the emotion. And again, like, how do any of us learn how to manage that? It's a big ask. And I will note, like, I had a great clinical supervisor. So like, thank goodness for that like I never actually got hurt. And I also had a clinical supervisor and a facility manager and other people that were there that I could use a walkie-talkie, be like, I need help, back up, like something's going on. But, again, I want to appreciate what you just said too. The expression of anger that I was on the receiving end of was completely valid. It's like, I came here, I drove an hour and a half in order to see my kid, and you're saying that you're not going to let me. Of course you're going to be mad at me about that. And of course you're hurt that your child is staying here and not staying with you, and how difficult that must be.
Yeah. Yeah. I would even say, and you must feel humiliated. You drove all this way to have me, this total stranger, tell you this. This must feel humiliating. So whatever feeling you're imagining they're feeling.
Well, and I think that actually you kind of hit the nail on the head with where I wanted to go next, which is like that conversation. One of the things that I've always heard is like, anger is a secondary emotion. And I think you just kind of alluded to it. So here I am, let's use that example. I'm having a parent in my face get very angry with me about a boundary that's being set. Talk to me about that idea of anger as a secondary emotion, because I think you just labeled a lot of it, but I would love for you to expand on that concept.
What I believe is under the anger is a feeling of betrayal, of rejection, or abandonment. And those things are all kind of different sides of the same coin, really. So, let's just use the word betrayal there. That father felt betrayed by you. And you represented the whole institution. Obviously, it's not you, but you're representing the social work institution, right? So, and I would name that. You feel completely betrayed. And you know what? You were betrayed because no one told you this was going to happen. You had no, reason to believe this. And this happened out from under you. And it wasn't fair. And you're right to be angry. So that's where I would go with that. But you yelling at me, this is not going to happen because this is not cool.
In those circumstances, when minors have been removed from the home, not at all uncommon for there to be a referral, particularly 10, 15, 20 years ago, for, let's say, a parent toward anger management. Can you talk about anger management and anger management classes? And this is for me, speaking as someone who is not in that world. I don't, I have never participated in them. I'm not particularly familiar with them. And me being like, what goes on in that room?
Well, I mean, it still does exist, but I think it can be very gaslighting when we're telling that person, in essence, you're the problem. Your anger is problematic. It's not valid. You just need to breathe more. You just need to hold a nice warm cup of tea or go for a walk, right? And that's what, going back to this client that gave me permission to share about her psychosis, her hallucinations for years, she went to DBT groups, for teens and young adults for years, and she thought she was the problem. No one said, you know what? Maybe these hallucinations of your mom are your body's way of helping you see who your mom is and that you need to separate from her. No one helped her see how valid those hallucinations actually were, that they were a warning to her. She came to me saying, I'm the problem. I'm the sick one in the family. And I'm like, oh, honey, you are not the sick one in the family. You are the only one who has feelings, who feels their feelings in this family. But yeah, so I think it can be very gaslighting. That's kind of my concern.
As you're talking about that, I mean, this is not a new conversation when we're looking at dialectical behavior therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, and this idea of like, we can't necessarily CBT our way out of racism. Like, we can't CBT our way out of an abusive household where it's like, okay, these are our realities. And it sounds like for you, one of the pieces that you're taking from knowledge of de-escalation is like the importance of validation. And then it sounds like, and then let's look at what's coming up for you and what feelings are under there and where they're coming from. And so you're seeing it more of a two-step process, because it's certainly something that I've wondered about. And like, don't get me wrong, I think there's absolutely a place for deep breathing. I do it all the time,
Sure.
where I'm like, calm your nervous system. But I'm still angry. The anger doesn't go away. It just might not come out in me screaming back.
Which, I think maybe the CBT, DBT, they maybe ascribe to our popular view that anger is only responding in kind, and it doesn't have to be. We can learn to have a healthy relationship with our anger, again, where we're channeling it out with boundaries. Boundaries are silent, or can be silent, with assertiveness, with accountability, no screaming involved. But there's other techniques, so let's maybe get to those, the ones I use in therapy. So one exercise that I have my clients do is I have them write a fantasy letter to maybe a parent. Let's just say it's a parent. It could be someone else. But, going back to anger is a secondary emotion. Underneath the anger is betrayal. Well, betrayal can only be caused by someone we have a very high expectation on. Someone who we expect to really love us unconditionally. So a lot of times it is a parent. And of course, we're going to be most angry at a parent who we feel doesn't nurture us or love us, who neglects us, right? And so I'll have them write a fantasy letter, share it with me, and my job is to validate it. And here's kind of what that needs to entail, though. It needs to really outline the pattern that we experience of that person that we're writing the letter to. So it could be something like, with me, with my father, I wrote the fantasy letter and I put it into an email and I sent it off. And I described the pattern. I said, you invalidate my feelings and then you make it about you. This is the pattern. And here are some examples. And I documented many examples. And so what I'm doing there is I'm bringing closure for me. I didn't have to send it to him. It could have given me closure, just writing it out for me. I'm bringing a sense of closure because I'm setting the record straight for my brain, for my body. I'm saying, this is what makes you monster-like, is you're just always invalidating my feelings and you're always making it about your feelings, right? And so that gives me peace. That lets my body outlet all that anger into words, and it needs to be into words. So going to a rage room and breaking things. That can feel good for like an hour or two, but truly giving ourselves catharsis involves words. We have to put our anger into words. So a fantasy letter is great for that. And then I can have a friend or a therapist just listen and just validate. Just go, yep, I hear you. I don't blame you for feeling that way. So that is very, very therapeutic.
You had mentioned the example of betrayal. So anger is often indicating betrayal. I am imagining a circumstance where I am at the grocery store and there is some problem with the credit card processing machine and the person in line in front of me. And that customer, in my mind, goes from 0 to 100 very quickly. So you have the cashier who says, sorry, I can't take that card right now. The machine's not going through. It's not connecting or whatever. And it escalates very quickly. In a situation like that, it's not necessarily betrayal. It's like, my guess is like the difference between like their hope or expectation of how that transaction was going to go. And now they're running late and they really need that milk or whatever it is, and I could easily stand there and be like, well, that's an angry person. I know that this is a sticking point for you. Can you talk about this idea of an angry person? And because I think there's a lot there to unpack, and you've mentioned it in private conversations with me. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit about it, because I could absolutely see that unfolding where it's like, wow, this person got really mad really fast. But can you talk about how and why that's happening?
Yes. So yes, I would say the stereotypical angry person, they have valid anger. So that person, they are being betrayed. They are feeling betrayed by not being able to purchase their groceries, but they're being triggered in the present. So they're having a disproportionate moment or reaction to the present. It's triggering some kind of anger from some kind of betrayal, usually from their family of origin from a very young age. And it's triggering that in the present. So if we go to maybe the humiliation and the neglect that they experienced as a child, it makes perfect sense why they're having this reaction in the present. So are their feelings valid? Yes, but their feelings don't belong in the present the way they're being expressed. So my goal is, as a therapist, is when that person comes into my office, so to speak, let's go to the root and let's address that root anger that is seeping into all these things in your life and making you that, quote, angry person, being so reactive all the time. Because it's, the root anger is just, we need to address it. And then you'll just react like a, quote, normal person when those things are happening. However, those kind of people, unfortunately, are the least likely to commit to therapy, right? If we're going to be honest, those people who are that reactive tend to have the least trust to come into therapy and to be vulnerable and to open up, because there's a lot of shame. And shame, when we experience a lot of shame, or we experience early attachment figures who we couldn't trust, we're not going to seek out therapy. And we're going to be that proverbial angry person out in public. So it's like a catch-22, if that makes any sense.
The older model of anger management, was looking at, I think, a lot of coping skills, of like replacement behaviors. You're talking about kind of looking under the hood, so to speak, looking at what I'm hearing is kind of the cognitive triad, like beliefs about the world, beliefs about self, beliefs about the future, and kind of where did these belief systems come from, and starting to deconstruct it. Does that work? Like, and like from a very real sense, we often think about therapy as, oh, I want to reduce my panic attacks, for example, or I want to improve my communication with my in-laws, or whatever it is. And then we talk about some of the underlying stuff. We might develop some coping mechanisms and some boundary setting and things like that. And so it's like, we can see in some models, or even without models, of like this helps toward this goal. When we're looking at reduction of disproportionate anger expressions, like, I don't know the right language, feel free to correct me. Does it work when we get under the hood? Does it actually reduce the intensity and frequency of those explosions.
Absolutely, it works. And I will even go as far to say that I believe what you're alluding to, the CBT, DBT, is really addressing symptoms, but we're not getting to the root. And so I have found when we go to the root, if someone's willing to go to the root, which not everyone is, but I would say the majority of my clients have been very willing to go to the root. Then we don't have any symptoms to address. And it's really liberating. And I can say that firsthand as someone who has gone to the root and no longer have those symptoms. I don't have to manage anything. I don't have to self-talk. I still do self-talk at times, but like not to the same degree that I used to have to. I don't have to slow down and take the deep breaths or hold the worm tea. It's really liberating to be like, oh my God, I'm just like healthy now. I've addressed the root, and the root is, usually rooted in very early childhood templates, which I spoke about before, that word template, of me, little Bronwyn, learning at age 2 that she doesn't matter because her mom is not making eye contact with her. Her mom isn't listening to her. Her mom is not showing any concern or interest in her. And me, adult Bronwyn, in my 50s, getting triggered when I'm talking to my husband, and he's not making consistent eye contact with me. Little Bronwyn's very much alive and well, and she is absolutely infuriated because she is re-experiencing I don't matter with her, with her current attachment figure. And she is reactive, and she is angry, and she feels ashamed. And when I integrate with little Bronwyn, then I can let her know, you know what? I don't blame you for feeling shame that mom never made any eye contact or showed concern or listened to you. I don't blame you. I know why you feel ashamed of yourself. You learned that her lack of interest in you was a you problem, that it was a reflection of you being not important enough, not enough. But little Bronwyn, what you need to know is what I know now, what adult Bronwyn knows, is that mom's lack of interest was 100% a mom problem. It was 100% a reflection of her own, personality disorder. And it had nothing to do with you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put all that shame that you feel, that's in your gut right now, that you feel in your gut when your husband isn't making eye contact, and we're going to put it all in this big cardboard box. And we're going to give it back to our mom. We're going to say, here you go. Mom, I'm realizing this isn't mine. It never was. We're going to return to its rightful owner. This is your shame. This is your shame. It's not ours. And then I'm going to look at little Bronwyn. I'm going to see her and say, you know what, little Bronwyn, I see you, and you are a precious little girl. And I see all of you. I see the good, bad, and the ugly. But it's a net good that I see in you.
As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about all these different models and thinking about Sue Johnson, thinking about Carl Rogers, and the capacity for the relationship between client and therapist to produce corrective experiences for the client, where it's like, you can talk about this anger. You can say the thing that you want to do, you've never been able to say before. And I will still be here. I will stay calm. I'm not going to yell back at you. I will still care about you, and I'm still going to show up next Tuesday and we're going to talk more. And how profound that container can be, particularly for somebody that hasn't had that container previously, whether that's because of family of origin or society at large or whatever it is, or all the things. And I really like what you said about the shame element, because it is a big ask to say, hey, if you've never or rarely felt environments where you can feel this and say it, express it, show me that you're upset, and I'm still going to be here. You're not going to scare me off. That's a whole lot of trust. So I would imagine when we're talking about working with someone who has these small, medium, and maybe large explosions out in the world at the grocery store clerk or at their boss or at their child, Granted, there are all these contextual elements that are hugely important of like, what are the other realities in the world and the stressors and all of that other stuff. But if we're looking at someone who is really struggling with, I guess I'm pulling language from 12-step, kind of like right-sized anger for circumstances where it doesn't feel disproportionate to the offense, are you spending a ton of time investing in safety as a therapist?
Oh, to create that trust.
Yeah, because it seems, as you said, someone that is walking through the world carrying so much shame, to develop trust that someone else is not going to reject them again, is not going to mock them, disrespect them. That is no easy feat for a clinician.
I think the minute we validate them, I think the minute they meet with us and we believe them, I think it starts with believing them, saying, if they're telling us something, well, my mom said this, I would be like, oh my God, I don't blame you. You must have felt infuriated. So if I'm like on, Team Beth from the minute that Beth comes into my office, and I'm believing her, I am validating her. Oh man, that's safety right there. She's like going to go, oh yeah, man, I don't feel any shame. Shame is not present in this relationship. This is the anti-shame experience actually, because she's making me realize I have every right to feel that way. And later, as I get to know Beth more, we can work on like how to respond. Maybe her response wasn't the best response. Of course it wasn't. But as she is feeling more validated in her feelings, then that shame ameliorates.
Yeah, more of a container to unpack it.
Yeah.
You had given the example of little Bronwyn and kind of this integration exercise. Can you speak more about that? You gave the example of like the letter and whether or not it's ever communicated, sent, the email gets sent or whatever it is. What are some, like in addition, like the integration exercise, what are some of those tools that you really find helpful to shed some light on this in a really direct, deliberate way?
Yeah. So I, on my podcast, Angry at the Right Things, I give a lot of these integration exercises for the listeners. I want them to absolutely appropriate these and do them for themselves as well as therapists to utilize them. I have several clients who are therapists themselves who use the integration exercise that they've experienced with me with their clients, and they have seen miraculous results. So yes, these are really important things that, kind of going even next level to what you brought up, creating that safety in therapy, the container between the therapist and the client. The integration exercise is actually doing that between the client and the client. It's actually helping the client validate their own feelings, know that they matter, trust themselves, get rid of their shame. It's actually helping them attach to themselves. So that's why it's called integration. So when I lead a client in this exercise, it's between adult Bronwyn and little Bronwyn. And that is the integration piece where integration, if you remember back to whenever we learned what integral numbers were in school, integral means a whole number, a complete number. And we could use the synonym with mature, maturity. Someone who is whole, complete, mature is someone who is, solid. They're what you see on the outside is what you get on the inside. There's no disintegration. There's no hidden, sequestered feelings or parts of themselves. They're just through and through, if that makes sense. They're a person of what we would call integrity. So to do these integration exercises for ourselves, for our clients, helps us trust ourselves. It dislodges shame. It helps us be true to ourselves and start to realize, you know what? I'm angry right now, and that's okay. What does this anger need? Does it need an accountability statement? Does it need to be assertive? Does it need a boundary? Does it need to go home and write a fantasy letter to this person and then take my time to figure out what to do after that and just, exercise this anger out of my body or expel it out of my body? What does it need? So we start to just do that for ourselves more, which is so, so powerful.
When you're talking with clients, particularly the clients that have just been accustomed to not feeling it and pushing it down or not acknowledging it at all when it comes to anger. How do you approach psychoeducation? Like, have that conversation with me. Because like I'm imagining like 17-year-old Beth.
Yeah.
And being like, well, I don't have anger.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen in the therapy session. But I'm imagining like what would Bronwyn do if 17-year-old Beth was your therapist being like, no, I'm not at all upset about this horrible things that have happened. And now, my parents splitting up. I'm just sad.
I have a sense of humor. Sometimes I'll say like, well, Beth, you know what? It's not a good sign when the therapist is more angry than the client. And I'm really angry at your parents right now. So help me understand how you're not, so I might kind of go at it that way. I might say, what does it mean for you to be angry? Is that bad? Does that make you like a failure in your eyes? Like, help me understand why this aversion to angry.
Okay. I'm transporting myself back to 17-year-old Beth. Because the anger does nothing for me, Bronwyn.
Oh, okay. Well, tell me more about that. Like, where did that start first showing up for you, where the anger is just futile for you?
Getting mad about it isn't going to change the situation. It's not going to change it. The bad things that have happened have already happened, and they're not magically going to be healed or restored.
Okay. So it sounds like when you've been angry in the past, it has been an exercise in futility, and you've kind of given up hope in that anger being an emotion that can move anything or change anything.
Right. If I felt anger, and particularly if I expressed it, all it would do is make the situation worse. It would just reinforce how helpless I am and that I can't influence what's going on in this situation.
So can I do a real thing with you right now?
Yeah, totally.
You're playing 17-year-old Beth, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So 17-year-old Beth, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a moment. And I want you to talk to your brain. And we're going to say to your brain, because I hear you hanging out in your brain, which is very smart and sharp. And I appreciate your brain. But you're going to say to your brain, I really appreciate all the hard work you do and how smart you are. But I'm going to ask you to take a break right now. And we'll come back to you later. There'll be lots of thinking later. But right now, you're just going to take a break. And I'm going to feel whatever I feel in my body. Because we're disassociating from our body by staying up here in our brain and logicking our way out of our feelings. So we're going to just go down to the body, put the brain on pause, and feel whatever might be hanging out in the body.
So where my mind just went clinically when you did that, and thank you, and I love that example, was I'm like, oh, look, it's dialectical behavior therapy, where it's like kind of logic and emotion and dropping down out of the part of me that's saying, this serves no purpose. This is not practical, which is absolutely, I've had a conversation that I've had with clients around anger where it's like, it is impractical. So why even get mad?
Yeah, but I would call that an exercise in dissociation. That whole argument, you're dissociating.
Yeah. Going into computer mode in order to protect myself from the feeling. So then going back into our created role play here, younger me, who, does not feel anger, says, it makes me want to cry and my heart is pounding.
Yeah. Then I would say, I bet it does. I don't blame you for wanting to cry. I bet there's so many tears that have been held inside for so long, and it must feel scary to let them out. And maybe it feels like they'd never stop. And I don't blame you for feeling hopeless, but I think it would feel really good to let those tears out and to know that anger and that betrayal underneath the anger is really valid.
I don't want to. I'm just curious. I'm curious where you'll go with that. I don't want to.
Well, I respect that. I don't blame you for not wanting to do that. I bet if you were to feel that anger and that betrayal and let yourself cry, it would feel really vulnerable. And maybe that doesn't feel safe yet. So I respect that.
I think one of the really interesting things about therapy is, like, obviously we can't script it and know what's going to come with us. But imagining this session and like really like watching the ball going back and forth between client and therapist and this potential like rejection of what you're saying, and you rolling with it. Again, not getting angry at my refusal to do what you've asked me to do. But again, an example of your validation and calm approach further contributing to this safe container that maybe in this moment I'm not cool with, but maybe I will be in 4 sessions or whatever else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might even say, I can only imagine, Beth, that you have never really felt safe to be vulnerable, that maybe when you were vulnerable, you felt very shamed, and that, makes you feel an aversion to having that kind of vulnerability with me or with yourself even. And that really, I don't blame you at all.
Rolling with this, imagining this therapy session, and let's pretend 17-year-old me, like, it's like, you got me, and I'm crying. I can also completely imagine leaving the therapist's office and feeling that acute sense of vulnerability hangover. That idea of like, oh my gosh, I have just actually shown my cards to this person. And I'm wondering, when you start doing really deep work like this, where you're getting underneath, out of the logic mind and into the emotion, how do you and do you inoculate? Where it's like, you might leave my office feeling really upset. Like,
I don't, so that's a really good question. I would say that's a good term, vulnerability hangover. I like that. And maybe that is there initially. But what I have seen is between that session and the next week, should we meet the following week, that client will say, oh my God, I feel so much more like peaceful. Yeah. And they do. I'm less triggered. I'm feeling less anxious, so they see their whole body's kind of just relaxing more. So I would say time tells these things, and it's really awesome to see. It is like witnessing someone coming back to life from the dead, to see this. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Thank you for playing along with me in that, because I think it was illuminating and also really powerful of like, for someone like you that really works in this space, like let's talk about anger. Let's talk about some of that resistance that comes up, and resistance is a controversial word because it's not like it's a irrational process. Like it's like, no, I want to protect myself. And that would make a lot of sense. For our listeners that want to learn more about anger in general, are there any authors, resources that you really love in your own work to kind of conceptualize, like, what is anger? Why do we have it? What do we do with it?
I can't think of one off the top of my mind. Yeah, just kind of more the research, the studies that I've seen kind of about the alexithymia. I don't know that anyone's put that into any kind of book quite yet that brings it all together in a cohesive way.
Thank you. And for our listeners that want to learn more about you and your work, what's the best way to do that?
Yes. So please listen to my podcast, Angry at the Right Things. I talk about, again, anger, hatred. Really, lately, that's been a very popular subject, is hatred, what to do with hatred, because it's valid too. Shame, what to do with shame. And, a lot of it's very practical as well as theoretical. It's my passion project, just to help other therapists. I didn't know what I was doing for so long, and had to learn it the hard way. And for also a resource for clients themselves. I'll have my clients listen to my podcast between sessions, and then they'll come to the next session with like, oh, what you said really made me think about this. And then we have great traction where we're just like hitting the ground running between sessions, because they're getting so many, they're stimulated to think, oh, it made me think of this time when I was 5, or right now with my spouse, what goes on. And it's just really like evocative, which we're moving towards emotions instead of away from them.
Fantastic. You've certainly given me a lot to think about, and I just appreciate you leaning in to what is often a really difficult topic for many of us. Again, for our listeners, we've had the pleasure today of sharing time with Bronwyn Schweigerdt, licensed marriage and family therapist. Thank you again, Bronwyn. It was wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Beth. This was fun.
You've just finished listening to another exclusive Continuing Ed podcast by Clearly Clinical. If you like what you just heard and you need Continuing Ed credits, please visit us at clearlyclinical.com to check out our one-year membership, where you'll have access to our growing library of Continuing Ed podcast courses. Clearly Clinical, where our goal is to help you learn, grow, and shine.